U.S. historical context autobiography, Dallas Bergdala, period 2. The historical events that affected my life are the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Bay of Pigs invasion, and then the World War II referring to the Holocaust. So the Cold War is a descriptive impact on my life. So I'm not going to read all of it, but I'm going to just summarize. So basically, with the Cuban Revolution that Fidel Castro overtook Che, and with Che Guevara overtook Batista, the former Cuban president or dictator, the socialist dictator. With this came the Castro and the Soviet Union to form really heavy ties, basically furthering the Cold War. This led to communism being really close to the United States, which led to things like the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bay of Pigs invasion. The United States, they feared the nuclear war. And while all this was happening, my great-grandparents were living in Cuba. They were eager to do something to protect their country from the cruel dictator Castro and from communism, since Castro had taken over their farms, lands, houses, animals, horses, everything. Basically communism, nothing was theirs, and everything belonged to the government. This caused them to form their own guerrilla warfare band and from their pueblo called Agua de Pasajeros, and they were called Los Asturianos. My great-grandfather and his 14 sons took action, and they launched a revolt against the regime. The cause of this was the death of my great-grandfather, Jose Gonzalo Teja, and many of his sons, which were my great-uncles. Their bodies were never returned for burial. Among the unkilled was my grandfather, Elia Gonzalo's, and he was taken as a prisoner for going against Castro. Among his brothers that were killed was one named Dionisio. From this, my dad gets his name, and then I get my name from my dad, which is Dionelis. As a teenager in Cuba, my dad would openly bash the regime. My father had ideas of eliminating communism. His actions and dreams put him in prison, in which he spent the majority of life in prison, or the majority of teenage years in prison. He was going to be assassinated at one point, so they did flee Cuba. And that was going to happen before that happened. And then the wet feet, dry feet policy Clinton had installed gave them a safe haven here in the United States. The Bay of Pigs invasion and the Cuban Missile Crisis. So going back to Eisenhower, Eisenhower had made a pact not a pact, but an agreement with the CIA in which the CIA would train Cuban refugees to basically take over Castro regime, which would eliminate communism like that so close to Cuba, like the United States. And among these trained was Los Asturianos, which was my family's guerrilla warfare band in Cuba. They fought for the warfare bands particular wasn't exactly trained through the CIA, but they basically are fighting for the same thing, which is the freedom of their country. And among the trained CIA, they were also fighting amongst them. So the Bay of Pigs obviously failed miserably, and my great-grandfather and the head of the war band were killed, as I explained earlier. And my great-grandmother and her daughters, which were my great-aunts, along with many others, were taken to concentration camps in Cuba, along with just little kids too and babies. When Kennedy in the Cuban Missile Crisis, when Kennedy put a naval blockade preventing supplies coming from the Soviet Union, that was created Cuban Missile Crisis, and then Kennedy, to kind of end that and fix his whole mess, he made a pact with the Soviet Union and Cuba, and he based the exiles that were helping them through the CIA and everything that gave him the intel in the first place that the missiles were there. He basically abandoned them and when he made that pact with the Soviet Union, so they were left alone defenseless and basically to fight for Cuba's freedom on their own and to take away communism on their own. They went on after getting imprisoned to continue to fight, and although Castro's militia had dissolved my family's warfare band, they did secretly continue fighting through their own ways, like politically campaigning against it, and because of this they were imprisoned many more times. And when my grandfather had my dad, Dionisio, he too was involved in campaigning against Castro, and for this he was in prison for the majority of his teenage years as well. The Holocaust descriptive impact on my life. During World War II, the Holocaust affected many Jehovah's Witnesses, which is my religion. They were in prison for not participating in government activities. Also, my mom said we have Jewish ancestry, which many of my great-great-aunts and uncles from my mom's side were affected because they were Jewish and taken to concentration camps. This affects me because they're my family and because it's another way my religion has been persecuted. Primary documents were Limited Test Ban Treaty, the U.S. National Security Council derivative, key people, Fidel Castro, Francis Batista, Che Guevara, John F. Kennedy, Dwight D. Eisenhower, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. The political aspect was basically the Cold War is an entire political war, and even U.S. politics had a big effect because Eisenhower's plan for the CIA entrainment. My family was trained within that, and with Kennedy's failed invasion and his abandonment, and him abandoning the Cuban Missile Crisis after that left my family and other Cubanites alone in the fight for Cuba's freedom. Economical aspect, basically Cuba prospered with the Soviet Union because it would have Cuba relied heavily on the Soviet Union, and also because communism basically took everything from Cubans, everything they ever owned, and land, property, money. The Cuba as the government itself prospered, but the people never did. They never saw that money. Basically, like for example, my family has told me that while they were in prison, they would have like expired meat and bad meat parts, and then eventually meat itself became very rare for anybody. And then cultivating your own food, like growing rice, like my family commonly did before the communism, it was only allowed after if you give like more than half it to the government. So the Cuban people basically forgot what it was to have an economy. Influence on societal thinking. So for this one, I have talking about like Ronald Reagan and how the Cold War influenced a lot of Americans and just the whole war to think very differently. That Ronald Reagan, for example, we see that in the Red Scare, being traumatized, and this leading up to the Berlin Wall, and then Ronald Reagan later having to like change minds and to take down the Berlin Wall. And then we see also how during the Cold War, Cubans were given kind of special treatment because of the dry feet, wet feet law, which in that time, yeah, it made sense because of the whole Cold War and everything that was happening with Cuba. But then later when Obama took us away, a lot of people were kind of mad about it because they thought it was not fair because everybody was suffering in Cuba, even now, but everyone is suffering anywhere in the nation. So it was just, Obama was just making it equal for everyone. Literature and art. Jose Marti is known to all Cubans. He was fought during the Spanish American War, and although this was before my family ever came to Cuba, my ancestors were still in Spain, but Jose Marti influenced how Cubans thought about freedom and how Cubans, and through his literary arcs, he influenced Cubans, the right kind of ideology they needed to preserve their Cuba's freedom. He did form the Cuban Revolutionary Party, and that's kind of where my family's guerrilla warfare band, they reflect on his work and they try to embody his same ideologies, fighting for the same thing, which was a free Cuba. Current events. So for this current event, I chose kind of like current event, a ton of them all together, and still the summary of all of them all together is basically that in Russia, the main thing is if you don't support the government, you are punished. So Jehovah's Witnesses are currently being persecuted because they only believe in worshiping Jehovah God, not any other world ruler. Since 2013, this religion has been outlawed in Russia because of their refusal to participate in military service. So being that they don't believe in killing or using violence, as the Bible says, it's not up to us to take just into our own hands. So currently many Jehovah's Witnesses are being imprisoned, tortured, being given lengthy sentences, unreasonable. They're being given alternatives such as accepting military service, but Jehovah's Witnesses stand firm in their beliefs. They have experienced persecution before during the Holocaust and are unfortunately experiencing it again. Jehovah's Witnesses are also banned in China, Vietnam, and several other Muslim countries. So while this is not just a single current event, it is a very common current event that's occurring in the world right now, and not only is prison being used as persecution, but also discussing methods such as torture. And why it's relevant to me? Well, the reason the persecution is relevant to me is because I am one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and with my mom, Mimi, just being part of it, part of the religion, I do feel very close to my fellow brothers and sisters all over the world internationally. They too are all family, and I fear that in later years, more countries will start persecuting Jehovah's Witnesses, and hopefully the United States doesn't come to that, but if we do fall in a socialist regime, then requiring either military service or any other kind of involvement, like for example, I don't vote or I don't partake in any political parties, but if later that is forced upon citizens of a country, then we too will be persecuted because we would not participate in that, remaining faithful servants of Jehovah God. Self-description. So ancestry. On my dad's side, my ancestors come from Asturias, Spain, and Coruña, Spain. My great-grandfathers come from Spain to Cuba, and from Cuba they came here. In Dominican Republic, on my mom's side, they come from West Africa, from slaves that were brought to Isla Española, Dominican Republic, and then my grandma, my mom says she has mixed with Native Dominican, Native Venezuelan. We did do a 23andMe DNA test, and she was basically pure Native. So they're my grandfather and my mom. She was born in Dominican Republic. My culture is mixed. Have Cuban Dominican culture is basically Hispanic culture. Where my dad's from, he is from a small town, Cienfuegos Agua de Pasajero, in Cuba. So it's a bit different from the rest of Cuba. Whereas in like the food is a bit different because my family cooks with ingredients that they've known all their life, and that was like very scarce ingredients that they barely had. So it's flavorful ingredients yet like it is resourceful. Clothes are always modest, looking, going out clothes, staying in clothes, staying in clothes. Cubans are very working, they're passionate, driven, they're a be the best at everything kind of culture. Now, in Dominican Republic, Santo Domingo, where my mom is from, everyone is joyful. People are concerned with being aren't concerned with being like the best. They just settle for like any kind of job. They just want to live in the now and enjoy the present. Dominican Republic is more vibrant, full of laughter, and they like having a good time. There's lots of dancing, and the food is very flavorful and colorful. Values. My family's values are and my own include being modest, having family at the core of all. We are really big on family. Being your family are your friends, are your only friends in life, and I agree. We do not believe in abuse of alcohol or drugs. We believe in fighting for what we believe in and never submitting ourselves to our oppressor, whether it be a bully at school or our government. We respect our elders very much and do not curse, nor do we have wild reputations for being scandalous people. We carry on and keep to ourselves, keeping those along our way in need, helping those along our way in need. How my background has shaped my life today. And basically, because of everything my family has been through, I'm very grateful growing up. And because growing up as immigrants' parents, as the majority of us, my friends and everyone I've known has grown up with immigrant parents. So we all know the struggle of like not speaking English right away and having to learn it in school. And basically, I've surrounded myself with people with similar values. So my ancestors knowing just everything they went through has basically just made me very determined in succeeding in school and building a good future for myself because I don't want to waste away everything my ancestors fought for. Goals: graduating with my A, doing dual enrollment, basically graduating college, going to medical school, and becoming baptized. How I want to be remembered in 100 years. I want to be remembered as a caring daughter, sister, and helpful friend. I want to be remembered for giving everything I did my best, for being successful in my Bible studies and my academic studies, but most importantly, above everything else, I want to be remembered as a faithful servant of Jehovah God. References. And this one's really cool because I wanted to quickly show because it portrays, not that one. It portrays my pictures of my great uncles, and that's my great grandfather. And this is Dionisto, which is great uncle my dad is named after.